Your Honor, my sister is simply too unstable and unpredictable to handle our father's estate, Beatrice declared through crocodile tears, dabbing her eyes with a tissue while gesturing dramatically toward the witness stand. She's been having episodes of severe depression and anxiety since his passing. I have medical documentation proving she's unfit to make sound financial decisions. I sat there in that sterile courtroom in Portland, Oregon, feeling like the walls were closing in around me. My face burned with humiliation as I watched my own sister perform this theatrical display of concern, painting me as some kind of dangerous, unstable person who couldn't be trusted with my own inheritance. The judge nodded sympathetically at Beatrice's testimony, clearly buying every word of her elaborate deception. My name is Lily Patterson, and I'm 32 years old. 6 months ago, I lost my father to cancer, and now I was watching my sister try to steal everything he'd worked for his entire life. But what made this betrayal so devastating wasn't just the money. It was the methodical way Beatrice had planned this whole scheme while our father lay dying in his hospital bed. The documents spread across the defendant's table looked official enough to fool anyone. Medical records, psychological evaluations, psychiatric recommendations, all bearing my name and detailing a fabricated history of mental illness that would make anyone question my competency. According to Beatrice's forged paperwork, I'd been suffering from severe bipolar disorder, had multiple suicide attempts, and required constant supervision to function in daily life. None of it was true. But in that moment, watching the judge's expression grow more concerned with each piece of evidence presented, I realized how brilliantly my sister had orchestrated this fraud. She'd stolen my medical information during those long nights at the hospital, used it to create authentic-looking documents, and even coached herself on the right medical terminology to make her lies sound convincing. She becomes violent when confronted about her spending habits, Beatrice continued, her voice quivering with fake emotion. Last month, she threw a vase at me during a family dinner. I'm genuinely concerned about what might happen if she gains control of Father's assets. She could hurt herself or others. I wanted to scream that it was all lies, but my lawyer had advised me to stay calm and let the legal process work. What he didn't understand was that Beatrice had thought of everything. She'd spent months preparing for this moment, creating a paper trail that would convince any court I was mentally incompetent. The vase she mentioned? It had fallen off the table during an argument, but she'd photographed the broken pieces and twisted the incident into evidence of my supposed violent tendencies. As I listened to her testimony, one terrifying thought kept echoing in my mind. What if she actually wins? Growing up, Beatrice and I had been inseparable. She was 4 years older, and I'd always looked up to her as my protector and guide. Our childhood in Portland was filled with shared secrets, late-night conversations, and the kind of bond that made other siblings jealous. When our mother died in a car accident when I was 15, Beatrice stepped in to help Dad raise me, and I thought our relationship was unbreakable. But money changes people in ways you never expect. Our father, Robert Patterson, had built a successful construction company from nothing. Starting with just a pickup truck and some basic tools, he'd grown Patterson Construction into one of the most respected firms in Oregon, specializing in commercial buildings and high-end residential projects. By the time he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer last year, the company was worth nearly $2 million, and he'd accumulated substantial savings and real estate holdings. The problems started during Dad's final months in the hospital. Beatrice had always been ambitious, but I began noticing subtle changes in her behavior. She'd volunteer to handle all of Dad's paperwork, insisting she wanted to spare me the burden during such a difficult time. She'd arrive early for visiting hours and stay late, claiming she was just being a devoted daughter. What I didn't realize was that she was using those private moments to photograph his medical files, insurance documents, and personal information. She'd gained access to his office files while supposedly organizing his affairs, and she'd even convinced him to give her power of attorney just in case something happened before he could update his will. Dad had always promised that Beatrice and I would inherit everything equally. He'd mentioned updating his will to reflect some recent property acquisitions, but the cancer progressed faster than anyone expected, and he passed away before making those changes. According to the existing will, everything was supposed to be split 50-50 between us. That's when Beatrice revealed her true plan. 2 weeks after the funeral, she'd approached me with a concerned expression and gentle voice. "Lily, sweetheart, I've been thinking about Dad's estate. You've been so emotional and unpredictable since he died. Maybe it would be better if I handled the financial aspects until you're feeling more stable." I'd been attending grief counseling sessions with Dr. Catherine Winters, a psychiatrist who specialized in helping people process loss. The sessions were helping me cope with Dad's death in healthy ways, but Beatrice seemed to view my therapy as evidence of mental weakness rather than emotional strength. "I don't need you to manage my inheritance," I'd told her firmly. "I'm perfectly capable of handling my own affairs." That conversation had been our last civil exchange. Within days, Beatrice's lawyer had filed papers claiming I was mentally incompetent and requesting guardianship over my portion of the estate. She'd supported her petition with those fabricated medical records, painting a picture of a sister who was not only mentally ill, but potentially dangerous. Now, sitting in this courtroom listening to her lies, I finally understood that Beatrice had never seen me as her beloved sister. I was just an obstacle standing between her and complete control of our father's fortune. The moment that shattered any remaining hope I had was when Beatrice's lawyer presented what appeared to be my complete psychiatric file. The documents were thick, professional-looking, and contained details that made my blood run cold. According to these fabricated records, I'd been secretly receiving treatment for severe bipolar disorder, had multiple hospitalizations for psychotic episodes, and required daily medication to prevent violent outbursts. "Your Honor, these medical records span the past 3 years," Beatrice's attorney explained, holding up the damning folder. "They clearly document Miss Patterson's deteriorating mental state and her increasing inability to make rational decisions. My client has been quietly managing these crises to protect both her sister and their father's business interests." I watched in horror as page after page of lies was presented as evidence. The forged documents included medication prescriptions I'd never taken, therapy notes from sessions I'd never attended, and even hospital intake forms from facilities I'd never visited. Beatrice had done her homework, creating a comprehensive fiction that would convince any reasonable person I was mentally unstable. The judge studied the papers with growing concern, occasionally glancing at me as if trying to assess whether I might suddenly become violent. "Miss Patterson," he addressed me directly, "are you currently taking any psychiatric medications?" "No, Your Honor," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've only been attending grief counseling with Dr. Catherine Winters to help process my father's death. These documents are completely fabricated." Beatrice's lawyer immediately objected. "Your Honor, denial of mental illness is a common symptom of the conditions described in these medical records. Miss Patterson's inability to acknowledge her psychological problems is precisely why she needs supervised care. It was a perfect trap. If I denied the allegations, they claimed it proved I was delusional. If I admitted to any emotional struggles following my father's death, they'd use it as evidence that I was mentally unstable. Beatrice had thought of every angle, anticipating how I might defend myself and preparing counter-arguments in advance. Furthermore, Beatrice's attorney continued, Miss Patterson has been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior since her father's passing. She's made several large, impulsive purchases, has had angry outbursts at family gatherings, and has expressed paranoid beliefs that her sister is somehow plotting against her. None of it was true, but the lies were specific and detailed enough to sound credible. The large purchases were actually payments for Dad's funeral expenses and medical bills. The angry outbursts had been my normal emotional reactions to Beatrice's manipulative behavior. And my paranoid beliefs about her plotting against me were turning out to be completely accurate. As I sat there listening to this character assassination disguised as concerned testimony, I felt a crushing sense of helplessness. Beatrice had spent months carefully constructing this elaborate deception, and she'd done it so skillfully that even I was starting to doubt my own memories. But then I remembered something that gave me the first glimmer of hope I'd felt all day. Dr. Catherine Winters was still out there, and she had the real medical records that could expose every single one of Beatrice's lies. The judge's preliminary ruling felt like a physical blow. Based on the evidence presented, I'm inclined to grant temporary guardianship to Miss Beatrice Patterson, pending a full psychological evaluation of the respondent. His words echoed through the courtroom as my world crumbled around me. Miss Lily Patterson will undergo a comprehensive psychiatric assessment within the next 30 days to determine her competency to manage financial affairs. I watched Beatrice struggle to contain her satisfaction, dabbing her eyes with tissues while nodding solemnly at the judge's decision. She'd won the first round, but her victory celebration would have to wait until we left the courtroom. For now, she maintained her performance as the concerned, reluctant sister who just wanted what was best for everyone involved. However, the judge continued, and I caught a flicker of uncertainty cross Beatrice's face. I'm troubled by some inconsistencies in the medical documentation. The court will appoint an independent psychiatrist to review these records and conduct the evaluation. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks for a final hearing. That small hesitation in his voice gave me hope. Maybe the forged documents weren't as perfect as Beatrice thought. Maybe a trained medical professional would spot the fabrications that had fooled the legal system. As we gathered our papers to leave, Beatrice's lawyer whispered something in her ear that made her nod enthusiastically. I couldn't hear the exact words, but the confident way she straightened her shoulders told me she wasn't worried about any independent evaluation. She probably figured that her forged records were comprehensive enough to fool another psychiatrist. Lily, Beatrice approached me in the hallway outside the courtroom, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. I want you to know that I'm only doing this because I love you. Once you get the help you need, we can work together to honor Dad's memory properly. The audacity of her performance was breathtaking. Here was the woman who'd spent months planning to rob me of my inheritance, and she was still pretending to be the caring older sister looking out for my best interests. I know exactly what you're doing, I told her quietly, keeping my voice level despite the rage building inside me. And when the truth comes out, you're going to face consequences you never imagined. She laughed softly, a sound that made my skin crawl. Sweetheart, you're proving my point about your paranoid delusions. There is no conspiracy. There are just medical facts and legal procedures designed to protect you from making decisions you'll regret later. Her lawyer joined us, carrying a briefcase full of lies and looking smugly confident. Miss Patterson, I'd recommend you use these next 2 weeks to prepare yourself for the psychiatric evaluation. Cooperation with the process will work in your favor when we determine the best long-term care options for your condition. They were already planning my future, discussing my life as if I wasn't standing right there. Beatrice had painted me as mentally incompetent, and now everyone from the judge to the lawyers was treating me like a confused child who needed constant supervision. But they'd made one critical mistake. In all their careful planning and document forgery, they'd assumed that Dr. Catherine Winters would never get involved in a legal proceeding. They figured that patient confidentiality would prevent her from contradicting their fabricated medical records, and that I'd be too emotionally distraught to think clearly about building a defense. What they didn't know was that I'd already reached out to Dr. Winters the moment I discovered Beatrice's scheme. When I'd seen those forged psychiatric records, my first instinct had been to contact the one person who knew the truth about my actual mental health treatment. Dr. Winters had been outraged when I showed her copies of the fabricated documents. Not only were they medically inaccurate, but they'd used her practice's letterhead and forged her signature on several key reports. Beatrice hadn't just committed fraud against me. She'd impersonated a licensed medical professional, which was a serious criminal offense. As I watched Beatrice and her lawyer walk away, discussing their strategy for the next hearing, I felt a calm confidence settle over me. They thought they'd won, but the real battle was just beginning. The 2 weeks between hearings felt like the longest period of my life. Beatrice had wasted no time in taking control of Dad's assets, using her temporary guardianship to freeze my access to everything from bank accounts to the family home. She'd even had the locks changed on Dad's house, claiming it was for security purposes, while the estate was being sorted out. But during those same 2 weeks, Dr. Catherine Winters and I had been busy building an airtight case against Beatrice's deception. Dr. Winters had pulled my complete, authentic medical files and documented every single discrepancy between the real records and Beatrice's forgeries. The fabricated documents contain medical terminology that's been used incorrectly, Dr. Winters explained, as we reviewed the evidence in her office. Whoever created these clearly Googled psychiatric symptoms and copied language from online sources, but they don't understand how actual medical professionals document patient care. She showed me side-by-side comparisons that were damning. The forged records claimed I'd been prescribed medications that weren't even used for the conditions they'd listed. They described symptoms that contradicted each other and included test results from procedures that had never been performed. More importantly, Dr. Winters continued, they forged my signature and used my practice's official letterhead. This isn't just fraud against you. It's impersonation of a medical professional, which carries serious criminal penalties. We'd spent hours preparing for the upcoming hearing, going through every detail of my actual treatment. The real records showed that I'd been receiving grief counseling to help process Dad's death, which was completely normal and healthy. My sessions had focused on coping strategies and emotional support, not treatment for any mental illness. Dr. Winters had also prepared a detailed analysis of how the forged documents had been created. She'd identified specific phrases that had been copied from medical websites and showed how Beatrice had used publicly available information about psychiatric conditions to create convincing-looking but medically nonsensical records. Meanwhile, I'd been digging into Beatrice's activities during Dad's final months. I'd contacted the hospital and discovered that she'd been taking photos of medical files during visiting hours, claiming she needed records for insurance purposes. The nursing staff remembered her asking detailed questions about Dad's medications and treatments, which they'd assumed was normal family concern. I'd also tracked down several of Dad's business associates who confirmed that Beatrice had been asking unusual questions about the company's financial status and future plans. She'd been gathering information for months, preparing for the moment when Dad passed away and she could seize control of everything. The most disturbing discovery came when I reviewed Dad's final weeks in detail. Beatrice had been present during every conversation with doctors, lawyers, and financial advisors. She'd positioned herself as the responsible daughter handling all the practical arrangements, which had given her access to every piece of information she'd needed to forge my medical records. As the date for the final hearing approached, I felt confident that we had overwhelming evidence to expose Beatrice's scheme. But I also knew that she wasn't going to go down without a fight. She'd invested too much time and effort into this fraud to give up easily. The night before the hearing, she called me with one final attempt at manipulation. Lily, I've been thinking about everything that's happened. Maybe we can work out a compromise. If you withdraw your objections to the guardianship, I promise to make sure you're well taken care of. You'll have everything you need, and I'll handle all the stressful financial decisions. Her offer was generous sounding but hollow. She was basically proposing to give me an allowance from my own inheritance, while she maintained control of everything else. It was a trap disguised as a compromise. No deal, I told her firmly. I'll see you in court tomorrow. The morning of the final hearing, I arrived at the courthouse with Dr. Catherine Winters by my side and a briefcase full of evidence that would destroy Beatrice's carefully constructed lies. I felt nervous but confident, knowing that we had the truth on our side and the medical expertise to prove every aspect of her fraud. Beatrice was already there with her lawyer, looking composed and sympathetic as she greeted various court officials. She'd dressed in conservative dark colors and minimal makeup, playing the role of the reluctant but responsible sister who just wanted to protect her mentally ill sibling. When she saw Dr. Winters, her confident expression faltered for just a moment before she recovered her composure. Your Honor, Beatrice's lawyer began as the hearing commenced. We're prepared to present additional evidence supporting our petition for permanent guardianship. Miss Lily Patterson's condition has deteriorated significantly since our last appearance, and she's been making increasingly irrational statements about alleged conspiracies and document forgery. He was trying to preemptively discredit any claims I might make about the fabricated medical records, painting my accusations as paranoid delusions rather than legitimate concerns about fraud. It was a clever strategy, but it wouldn't hold up against the evidence we were about to present. Furthermore, he continued, Miss Patterson has been harassing medical professionals and making wild accusations about her sister's motives. This behavior demonstrates exactly why she needs supervised care and cannot be trusted to manage significant financial assets. My lawyer stood up to respond. Your Honor, we have compelling evidence that the medical records presented in this case have been systematically fabricated. We've brought the defendant's actual treating physician, Dr. Catherine Winters, who can testify about the authentic medical history versus these forged documents. The judge looked intrigued but skeptical. Dr. Winters, you're Miss Patterson's treating psychiatrist? Yes, Your Honor. Miss Patterson has been my patient for grief counseling following her father's death. She's been receiving completely normal therapy to help process her loss. She has never been diagnosed with any serious mental illness, and she's never exhibited any of the symptoms described in those fabricated records. Beatrice's lawyer immediately objected. Your Honor, patient confidentiality prevents Dr. Winters from discussing specific medical details without proper authorization. I have Miss Patterson's written consent to discuss her medical history, Dr. Winters replied smoothly, producing a signed release form. And more importantly, I have evidence that someone has forged my signature and used my practice's letterhead to create fraudulent medical documents. The color drained from Beatrice's face as Dr. Winters opened her briefcase and began laying out evidence. The side-by-side comparisons of real versus forged records were devastating, showing obvious inconsistencies in medical terminology, impossible symptom combinations, and prescriptions for medications that didn't exist. These forged documents contain multiple medical errors that no trained professional would make, Dr. Winters testified. They describe treatment protocols that contradict established psychiatric practice, and they reference medications and procedures that were never administered to Miss Patterson. As the evidence mounted, I watched Beatrice's confident facade crumble. She kept whispering urgently to her lawyer, who was clearly realizing that their case was collapsing in spectacular fashion. The forged documents that had seemed so convincing 2 weeks ago now looked like amateur attempts at medical fraud. Additionally, Dr. Winters continued, someone has forged my signature and used my practice's official letterhead without authorization. This constitutes impersonation of a medical professional, which is a serious criminal offense. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern as he reviewed the evidence. What had started as a family dispute over inheritance was now clearly a case of systematic fraud, perjury, and criminal impersonation. Beatrice finally understood that her perfect plan was unraveling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Just as Beatrice began to panic, realizing her fraud was being exposed, the courtroom doors opened and her face went completely white. Dr. Catherine Winters had arrived with a second briefcase, and the confident smirk that had been playing at the corners of Beatrice's mouth vanished entirely. Your Honor, Dr. Winters announced, I have additional evidence that proves these medical records were not only forged, but that Miss Beatrice Patterson systematically stole her sister's personal medical information to create these fabricated documents. Beatrice's lawyer frantically tried to object, but the judge was already examining the new evidence with intense interest. Dr. Winters had brought computer forensics showing that someone had accessed medical databases using stolen patient information, photograph timestamps proving when the forgeries were created, and even security footage from the hospital showing Beatrice taking pictures of confidential medical files. These forged records contain medical terminology that's been copied directly from online sources, Dr. Winters testified, her voice clear and professional. The person who created them clearly researched psychiatric conditions on the internet and then attempted to create authentic-looking documents. However, they made numerous errors that any trained medical professional would immediately recognize. She methodically dismantled every aspect of Beatrice's scheme, pointing out impossible drug interactions, contradictory diagnoses, and treatment protocols that didn't exist in legitimate psychiatric practice. The fabricated records that had seemed so convincing were now revealed as amateur attempts at medical fraud. Miss Lily Patterson has been my patient for grief counseling following her father's death, Dr. Winters continued. She has never been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, has never had suicidal ideations, and has never exhibited any violent or unstable behavior. The person who forged these documents has committed fraud against the court, against Miss Patterson, and against my medical practice. Beatrice sat frozen in her chair, watching months of careful planning evaporate as the truth was laid bare. Her lawyer looked stunned, clearly realizing that he'd unknowingly participated in presenting fraudulent evidence to the court. The judge's expression was thunderous as he absorbed the magnitude of the deception. "Miss Beatrice Patterson," he said sternly, "you appear to have committed perjury, document fraud, and identity theft in an attempt to defraud your sister of her rightful inheritance." The devastating revelation that Beatrice had committed multiple felonies sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Her elaborate performance as the concerned sister immediately crumbled as the judge called for court officers to take her into custody pending formal charges. "No, wait!" Beatrice finally broke her composed facade, tears streaming down her face as she realized her freedom was about to be taken away. "You don't understand. I was just trying to protect our father's legacy. Lily isn't capable of handling that much responsibility." But her desperate protests only made things worse. Every word she spoke now contradicted her earlier testimony, proving that she'd been lying throughout the entire proceedings. The judge had no patience for her excuses, having been thoroughly deceived by her fraudulent evidence. "Miss Patterson," the judge addressed her sternly, "you have systematically defrauded this court with fabricated medical evidence. You've committed perjury under oath, forged professional documents, and attempted to steal your sister's inheritance through criminal deception. These are serious felony charges that will result in substantial prison time." As court officers approached to arrest her, Beatrice turned to me with a mixture of rage and desperation. "You've ruined everything," she screamed, abandoning any pretense of sisterly concern. "Dad always loved you more, and now you're going to destroy our entire family over money." Her mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the bitter, greedy person she'd become. The concerned sister act was over, replaced by raw fury at being caught in her elaborate scheme. "Miss Lily Patterson," the judge continued, turning his attention to me, "I apologize that this court was initially deceived by fraudulent evidence. Your father's will shall be executed as originally written, with you receiving your full inheritance. Additionally, you may pursue civil damages against your sister for the emotional distress and financial harm caused by her criminal actions." I watched as Beatrice was led away in handcuffs, her careful planning and months of deception finally catching up with her. The sister I'd once loved and trusted was now facing years in prison for her betrayal, and I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness as justice was finally served. Beatrice faced criminal charges for perjury, document forgery, and attempted inheritance fraud, resulting in a 3-year prison sentence and substantial financial penalties when Dr. Winters' testimony exposed her systematic deception. Her reputation was permanently destroyed when the legal community learned she had forged medical documents and committed perjury in court, making her unemployable in positions requiring trust or integrity, while facing ongoing civil lawsuits from both me and Dr. Winters' practice. The financial costs of her legal defense, combined with the restitution payments ordered by the court, exceeded any potential benefit from the failed fraud scheme, leaving her financially devastated and socially isolated when she was eventually released from prison. Her relationship with extended family members and former friends was permanently damaged when they learned she had tried to steal my inheritance through fabricated mental illness claims, while her criminal record made it difficult for her to rebuild any semblance of her former life. I rebuilt my life using the inheritance Dad had intended for me, finally able to pursue the business degree I'd postponed to care for him during his illness. While the experience taught me the importance of documenting everything and trusting professional expertise when facing those who would exploit family tragedy for personal gain. Though Beatrice's betrayal had been devastating, watching her face the full consequences of her criminal deception gave me a deep sense of justice and closure that allowed me to move forward with confidence and peace.